Okay, so please introduce yourself. So, for example, my name is Rhonda Holberton, and I'm a new media artist based in San Jose, California.
Hello, my name is Peter Graf. I'm a software developer and I'm based in Munich, Germany. I've also lived in the States for 5 years between 94 and 99.
Wonderful. So, we're going to start way back before we kind of work our way up to Vermal in the 90s. So,
Yeah.
what is your earliest memory you have of developing technology?
My earliest memory of developing technology is that I started university in 1981 in Germany, in Munich at the TU München. And there, I think in 1983 or so, I got into a group of people. We had a Microvex that was running a version of Unix. And I started to do network-based TCP/IP programming on Unix. And that was basically, I think, the first real development activity that I had. From there, the group leaders, they were all PhD students, and after they finished their PhD, they went on to a company in Munich called SoftLab. And I basically, when I finished university, I also joined them there. And we were doing the same type of Unix-based network programming. Basically, this was more a LAN-based network programming. The internet didn't really exist in it existed, of course, but nobody was doing, at least not in Germany, not anybody was doing anything over it. But there was like in-house corporate networks existed. And so we did Unix-based in-house. For example, one thing I did was a big warehouse for BMW, basically keeping track of what is where, and it was all robots, as it was all done it was all fully automatic. And so basically keeping track where everything is, everything was labeled with barcodes. And so there were barcode readers and stuff like that. So it was really also, as when the internet came along in 93, 94, I had already programmed in C, C++ for TCP/IP connection Unix program, done it for almost 10 years. So the internet felt very natural.
Great. So maybe as a follow-up question to that, what was your experience or how did you find your way to Web 3D, or what's being commonly referred to as the metaverse these days?
Yeah. First, I found my way to San Francisco. I got married to Tamiko in 91, and in 94, we decided to move to San Francisco. So in September of 94, we arrived in San Francisco. And at that time, friends of Tamiko's who had been working for Thinking Machines in Boston, a whole group of them had moved to San Francisco, and they were doing a company called Vase Incorporated, as Brewster Kahle was doing, Vase Incorporated, which was at that time an internet search engine technology. And I worked for them for half a year, and at that time, the net, from October of 94 till April of 95. And at that time, the net really took off, and everybody was talking about the Netscape browser, and Netscape went public, and whatever. So all these things happened. And at that point, I got in touch, or some friends from Munich actually got in touch with me, as people I had worked with at SoftLab, got in touch with me and said, we have funding for a startup, and we want to start an internet company. And by the way, you have to read Snow Crash in order to understand what we're up to. I said, okay, I read Snow Crash. So I read Snow Crash. I called them, one of them actually came over and said, okay, I want to start a company called Black Sun. Like in Snow Crash, I think the company that runs the metaverse is also called Black Sun. Or is the metaverse called the Black Sun? I don't remember anymore. So it's a term, as a black sun, as a black is in color, and sun is in the star is basically a term that we took from Snow Crash, and more or less our business plan was also taken from Snow Crash. So that was really at that point we started out. That was in July of 95. We started out with Black Sun Interactive, first in Munich, but it was clear for us the investment money came from the US. So it was clear that we needed a presence in the US. So we started a US company and a European company, and I was basically the US company. The US company then was run out of our back room in our house in the Mission. As a US company, I think for the first year or so existed exactly of a PC under my desk that was running 24/7. So, that was also my web server also.
And just for a little bit of context, can you tell us what was its primary focus and what were some of the early projects or kind of applications?
Yeah, the primary focus of Black Sun was the metaverse, cyberspace, and there were different terms for it. So what we really started as a very first version, we were a sister company. Our investor had also invested in Lycos. And Lycos at that time, like Yahoo, was a very big search engine, but it also had categories. So basically, you could also, websites were rated and were categorized. What we did as a very first project, the first project was called Point Worlds. We took the Lycos data that basically said, what are the top, let's say, car manufacturer websites? What are the top educational websites? What are the top, I don't know, medical websites? And they had a rating, they categorized the websites and they rated them. And we basically took those numbers from Lycos, the rating numbers from Lycos, and transferred them into 3D characteristics of buildings, then create a village, so to speak, with a circle of houses around. Then if you clicked on the house, you basically got to this website of the car manufacturer or the educational or whatever the topic was. So this was the first thing. But for us, it was cyberspace. We wanted to, as exactly this thing, we wanted avatars in 3D space, interaction, talking to other people, meeting other people. This was always our main focus.
As a follow-up to that, at the time, there was text-based internet search engines, that was a feature. And so you're kind of building on top of that. What is it about the kind of 3D experience that you were producing that felt important at that time?
What was important for us with a 3D experience was that we always saw it as a place where people could come together, chat, exchange information, and do this in 3D in a way more natural than just doing it without any presence. I mean, you can have a message board and basically people can interact over the message board. But for us, it was also, we wanted to have a presence. People should, as the social interaction was the thing. And our 3D technology was always tied in with websites. So it was not a browser that was a standalone thing. It was a plugin for Netscape and Internet Explorer and later on other browsers. But it could always be embedded in a website. So basically you could have a website with all sorts of information, and that on that website you had the chance to put a 3D chat there. I mean, now very often if I go to sites and buy something, there's also still a chat where I can chat to some salespeople or support people or just other customers. So that was our idea, but we wanted to take that into 3D, very much driven by Snow Crash. So we wanted to, as in the book, everybody meets in the cyberspace and like big things happen in the cyberspace, and this was exactly our vision also. And I think it's very much the same what Zuckerberg was announcing a couple of months back. It was really the same idea.
Yeah, but do you think your experience with early local networks, LANs, was also very much tied to kind of spatialized and material objects, right, in the BMW production? Do you think that experience changed the way that you thought about interaction over the web?
My experience with internet technology, one thing that was clear for me is that the web should be much more interactive than it was at that time. Basically, it was all mostly was this web at that time was static web pages, and there were message boards. So message boards were kind of the only thing. So things like Facebook or WhatsApp or all those things didn't exist. So there was one service, and we really collaborated with them. It was kind of like you could exchange. It was an Israeli company, and on their service, you could basically exchange messages, very much like WhatsApp. Was it iChat or I don't remember the name of that. So we basically built a bridge between their technology and our technology, so that users that came from their client could interact with people that came through our client, through our web client, in order to basically increase the volume, also the number of people that were interested in our backend, also in our service.
So maybe then to kind of dig down into that a little bit, what were some of the technological innovations that were significant or needed to be in place for the work that you were doing?
The one thing that needed to be in place and that was not very much existing at that time and was a big problem for us was two things actually. One was good graphics cards so that you actually could create a 3D world and a 3D world with enough polygons to make it worthwhile. And the first graphic cards that allowed that at all were on Windows 95, coming out in 95, 96 or something like that. And before that, you couldn't do any 3D on a PC. You could do it on SGI machines, but those were rather expensive and nobody would have them at home. Once we got the DirectX Windows-based graphic cards and also OpenGL-based graphic cards that came out at that time for PCs, then that was the one thing that made it happen. The other thing was, of course, connectivity. 3D content is rather big. In terms of nowadays, it's ridiculously small. But back then, a megabyte download was something that people had to wait 4 to 5 minutes. And therefore, having a world that had a megabyte in size, we didn't want to have. Just the imagery is multiple megabytes and better in the end. But it was always a big problem for us.
Right. So your vision was kind of ahead of the existing architecture, the technology in place.
Yeah. That's the other thing that happened once we stopped in 2002. Second Life became rather popular, and I don't know, by 2008 or so, everybody had a Second Life page, even the German government and Goethe Institute and whoever. Also, everybody thought they needed a Second Life page. And then I think about 2010, Facebook became exactly that type of marketplace that we had envisioned without 3D. And Facebook now has existed for 12 years and has been this marketplace. And now Zuckerberg basically also sees the need that he wants to put it in 3D. I think this is what's happening.
So my next question is kind of that. So what were some of the technological or cultural changes that have been kind of implemented or that are now in place that allow the metaverse to now be a household term and for Mark Zuckerberg to be interested, in this as a feature?
Also the things that are now in place and that were not in place in the late 90s is really the connectivity and also the availability of text, voice chat. What we are doing currently was not possible in the 90s. Like there was a company called Online. They were also in the 3D online business in San Francisco, and we did some experiments. They had a voice chat server, but the other problem was that you could connect more than like 8 people to the server, and then the server was maxed out. So it was really voice chatting, and mixing the different audio channels was a real big problem. I think when I saw the video that Zuckerberg brought out, his avatars didn't have a lower body and were very fixed, and those avatars looked very much, had the same restrictions our avatars had in 97. Ours got much better after that. But the one thing we could not do was with voice chat. So it was all text chat. What we had is text to voice component where you could basically configure your own voice, like quite a lot of parameters. So you could sound like a woman, like a man, with speaking fast, speaking slow, high pitch, low pitch, whatever. There were quite a lot of parameters. And then basically it would read the texts that you type to the other people. So it would show up, as when you were in the other world, you said hello, then your avatar would really say hello. That we really had a microphone, that was not doable. I don't think it was doable in 2002. A little later, I had the first Skype conversation. That was really, I think Skype came out, or must have come out around 2002 or so. I remember we were in San Diego for half a year in 2002, and there I had my first Skype conversations with people in Munich. They knew about it, I didn't know about it. I think it really started out as a European thing and then made its way to the States. Came from Estonia or something.
So before we kind of jump into some kind of future-oriented question, is there a specific project that you worked on or technological achievement that you kind of jump over the hurdle that you were most proud of?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I'm most proud of is really Cybertown. Cybertown was started by some guys in LA, I think also around 95, 96. And they had at first used some interaction technology. I don't remember what they used. But at some point we met them and they said, yeah, our technology is not really good and we don't know whether it's still, people are working on it. And we said, no, if you want to switch over, we would like to have you, because they were quite an active community. They had like the evening, there were a couple of thousand people in there, and it was a lively thing. And then we signed, Cybertown was run by Black Sun from maybe 98 to 2002. And then we gave it back to them, and then they ran it for another, I think it ran until 2010. First of all, we had a whole infrastructure of places. You could have your own private place, your own private house. That house had a 3D representation, but also had a 2D representation as very much like a Facebook page that you create. Later on, when Facebook came out in 2010, I really looked at it and damn it, we did all of this. The like button we didn't have, but everything else that you could share information with other people, you could post it on your page and so on and so forth, was all there. Yeah, let me talk a little bit more about Cybertown. So Cybertown, first of all, had this private places where you could, very much like Facebook, but also in 3D. Then we had a whole economy there. You could create stuff, upload it, sell it, and then other people could buy it. So people were were creating flowers or pets or whatever. You could also have pets that had actions, they could talk, as they were chatbots. Then there was a whole system of a community there. There was a mayor, there were elections, there were public meetings. So it was really it was a town, it was a space. I was basically the technological lead for all the back end of that. Mostly in like what I actually did, I was not working so much on the 3D side. I was working on the back end side, on the interaction side, as it was still this, what I said before, this TCP/IP network programming with a database in the back, and then as a very much distributed things, like also I think very much like what Facebook does, all the web pages that need to be cached. So we did a lot of things I think that Facebook did. We had done them 10 years earlier. We did a lot of things that Zuckerberg now wants to do, and we had done them 25 years earlier. And I really remember when this video came out, when Zuckerberg's video came out this summer, and I called I still know all the people that were co-founders of Black Sun. And so I called a couple of them, or we got together at some point. We really laughed because this video, Zuckerberg's video, was really so much what we had done 25 years ago or 20 years ago. We really laughed and said, damn it, we should have, why didn't ours fly? I mean, I had this a couple of times. I had it with Second Life, but there I understood it. I know the Linden Labs people. I think in the whole life of Black Sun, we spent about $30 million, mostly on development and of course on advertising. And I think they spent $50 million on advertising. So making Second Life very big in everybody's, Second Life was a household name. Yeah. And we never got there. So that was the reason. And then Facebook, of course, has its own story. I don't know why they became so big. Yeah.
Timing is everything, right? So this is actually kind of interesting. The fact that Mark Zuckerberg's future looks a lot like your past. Consideration of the next question. So at the time when you were developing Black Sun or all of these other kind of, other projects, what did you think that the future of Web 3D was going to look like in like 2020?
What did I think what the future of Web 3D would look like in 2020? I think we never had the feeling to think about something 20 years in the future, because looking back now, it's interesting. For example, the Black Sun technology still works on nowadays Windows 11 computers. Tamiko still uses it, and Tamiko built some of her artworks on the Wormhole browser that we have, and this browser still exists and it still works, and so you can use it out of the box on a Windows 11 machine. You can run it, which is very interesting. So they haven't really changed that much. So Microsoft kept DirectX basically very stable from Windows 98 until up to now. So as I'm looking backwards from now, I have the feeling not much has changed. Of course, iPhones. I mean, iPhones are the big thing that we did not see. And having phones, having iPads, this is a very big thing we didn't see. The same now. Would you dare to say something about 2040? What your computer would look like in 2040? What your life, what your work life with a computer would look like in 2000? I wouldn't, because I have the feeling that I have no idea, I have no plan on what's going on. Yes. Of course, we wanted voice chat. That was something we wanted, of course. Also in Snow Crash, there is this glasses. So very much like the Oculus and those glasses. So those things, of course, we thought about and we dreamt about. But the ones that were existing then were like ones that were experimented with at universities were these like monstrous things that you could never ever, basically a laptop PC with some contraption in front of your face.
So you said you were starting to talk about something that I find actually incredibly interesting and might be particularly relevant to some of our students. So we started out this conversation. You were approached by a couple of folks who wanted you to come work with them as a developer, but they wanted you to read Snow Crash, right? And you even just said, as a developer, just thinking about, where you are now, like what is your deliverable? How do you reach the goal? So the way that you think as a developer is very different than the way that you would think as like an author writing speculative fiction about, some imagined future, or as an artist, right? And so it seems important to you that the Snow Crash also seems important to you. So how do you kind of reconcile that long-term vision through kind of creative process and then technological development within that framework, as you were kind of being asked to do at the time?
The vision of something like Snow Crash and the technology, it's really like those people that approached me were all former colleagues of mine. So they were also programmers and they had worked at the same team. All six of us came from the same team at Software. And so they had just by some means gotten a connection to an investor who had made a lot of money selling BookLink, a browser, to AOL. And he wanted to reinvest some of that money. And so he gave us a couple of million. He gave Lycos a couple of million. He basically started out to lots of different internet things. So I think in particular as one of our founders, the CEO, Franz Buchenberger, he was a gamer. He was a developer, but he was also a gamer. And he played a lot of those Dungeons and Dragons like fantasy games. And I think he was interested in this gaming as a, like very much, I think what he wanted to create was something like Witcher 3, but with other people. Yeah, so that was his idea. And together, as a playing Witcher 3 in a group. And he had also, I think he was the one who had read Snow Crash. And so he said, hey, guys, read Snow Crash. This is a very interesting idea. And I think the internet is really, this is all doable in the internet. So I read it, or we read it, and we said, hey, wow, yeah. So from a networking point of view, as I said, from a networking point of view, guys, no problem. I can, in half a year, I can create the infrastructure to do this. And that's actually what I did. And then on the front end, we had also people that came more from a gaming direction and that knew how to do 3D programming on the front end side, as really do a 3D browser. Even though I think our first one, which was not verbal based yet, was kind of really poor. I think we all had too much of a business background and not a 3D artist background. And then actually Holger Graf, he was a developer from Berlin, and he in his spare time basically had created a web browser. And he approached us at some point and said, hey, I have this web browser, but nobody's interested, but I see that you might be interested. And he said, yeah, come on board. You can be one of you get the same amount of shares that we have, and we take your browser. And so that was, so basically for us, it was looking at Snow Crash, it was really, as I'm reading the book, I clearly saw how to implement it. So how to implement this metaverse, this Black Sun. And so I wouldn't have thought about it because actually at that point, I didn't really spend a lot of my non-working time with computers. I think not a lot of people did in the, let's say, 94, 95. There was nothing, as you could, of course, I don't know, what could you do? You could go to AOL or you could go to, So, and therefore, I had a computer, I worked with computers, but I spent my spare time in North Beach in some Italian bars and not in front of my computer. And then, of course, seeing this Snow Crash thing, then I understood, wow, this could be something like entertainment on the web could also, for me, the web was more an information machine. And that's also, I think, still the way I use the web. I read the New York Times, I read the Spiegel, I look at videos, I watch soccer, but currently I'm watching soccer over the web. And so this whole thing, I wouldn't, chat groups or anything never happened for me. And Witcher was really something at some point I said, I need to see what those games can do. And we have the daughter of friends of ours, and she studies something with computer science, and she became an intern with Tamiko and me, and she was at our house she was staying with us last January. And then at some point I said, so what games are you playing? And she said, oh, I'm playing Witcher. And I said, can you show this to me? And she said, yeah, of course. Yeah. And so she installed it on my machine. So she played it. So I watched her playing it for an hour or so. And then I read a couple of the books because I wanted to understand the backstory. And so, and then, that was it. I said, okay, I've seen this stuff and I understand what those stuff can do and how far they gotten with the realism that they put into those fantasy scenes. And this was something, of course, we also always tried to get more realism into our 3D worlds. Like, for example, we had really beautiful avatars. We had a cooperation with Canal Plus in France. They had a really, really beautiful world called Deuxième Monde, as a second world, where they recreated about 14 different parts of Paris in Wormhole. Unfortunately, I don't have any of that. I don't know whether any of this exists. For example, I had a really, really beautiful Place de Vosges. That's in the Marais. It's a square-shaped square with really nice buildings around it. Or they had like the pyramid and the Louvre around it. And they had these were beautiful worlds. And they also had an incredible avatar. It was called Avatar Builder. You could basically start with a naked model in the first versions, even with penis. For the American version, we had to take the penis away. And then you could basically put on underwear, you could put on clothes, you could resize all body parts and like longer arms, thicker arms, bigger head, smaller head. So on the one hand, you could create very photorealistic avatars. On the other hand, you could also create all sort of alien whatever figures. And those avatars, they had all sorts of movements and stuff. You could really walk them around. They could jump. They could just move their arms. The only thing they didn't really do, they couldn't move their face. Places where you could have a facial expression on it, but that stayed the same.
No, it's perfect. We're kind of discussing the ways that kind of creative processes zipper up with more technological processes, in the development of, especially I think in kind of Web 3D, but probably any new venture. You have to imagine it, and then what are the ways that a project without the technical backend is going to fail, like if that's not in place. But also a project can fail if it doesn't have the vision, right? The kind of artistic or social or there's lots of different ways, and I think you're starting to express some things like a couple different threads, right? Like one way to approach, I think, hooking users is create a more lifelike environment. Or you're even talking about the young woman staying with you is into this world both because I think it's a playable game that she likes, but there's also these like books and backstory. So there's this world building aspect that doesn't necessarily rely realistic polygonal modeling, but the realities that we create in our head. And then like the other part of this, right, is like these things only work if there's users, right? Like the kind of connective tissue. It has something that maybe you don't use the internet for, that kind of social space, but I also think is an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah,
it's a really beautiful answer. I just like you. It's so perfect. Everything you were saying, I was just like, wonderful. So we're kind of done with our formalized interview right now, but like, I think 2 follow-up questions that would be like, what haven't I asked you yet that I should be asking? And then what should I be asking? I'm going to be talking to Mitra later today. What should I be asking him? So those two kind of follow-up questions.
What should you be asking me what you haven't? It's a little side story, and you might have noticed that Black Sun started out as Black Sun, as a color and star, and ended as Black Sun with 2 X's. And there the story was that Scott McNeely, the head of Sun Microsystems at the point, came to us and said he will not allow any software company with the word Sun in it to exist. And we told our investor, who was at that time, also Dave Weatherall is his name. He was like on the world's most richest person. He was just after Scott McNeely, like at somewhere in the 30s or something like that. And he said, no, we will not. No, we don't change the name. No, it's all okay. It's all okay. And then Scott basically called and said he will terminate all server business with and then Dave Weatherall said, oops, this is serious. So guys, you have to rename. And then Black Sun with the 2 X's for one hand, Scott McNeely was okay then. And on the other hand, for us, it sounded the same, so to speak. Yeah, so that was the story there. And I even, so one of Tamiko's friends from Thinking Machines, all the technical people from Thinking Machines actually ended up at Sun. Because when Thinking Machines went under, I don't know, in 89 or 90 or so, then Sun bought the technical side of it. And so they were really working at Sun, and one of them in particular was really working closely with Scott McNeely. And at some point I talked to him and said, could you find out how serious this is? And within a day he called me back and said, Peter, this is really serious. He means it. There's no way he's not gonna go for it. Yeah. So he is serious about this. He does not want a company that has the word Sun in it to exist. So he said, okay. Then after he called Weatherall and said he wants to terminate all server licenses with Lycos, for Lycos, then it was clear that he meant business. So this was like a little side story there. Mitra, I met Mitra at Waze, actually. He was also, I don't know how he came to Waze, but he was at Waze. And then Mitra went on to work for Worlds Inc., where Tamiko was also working. And so from Waze, Mitra went to Worlds Inc., and I went to Black Sun. And we have been friends since the Waze days. Now, I think Worlds has its own story, and you have to talk about it. One thing that I found out not too long ago, because Mitra published it on the web, we had worked together on trying to create a extension to Vermal that would be a web protocol, so that you could basically interact with different world worlds so interact between, like, with an avatar from Black Sun, go to a world's world, and vice versa, and have objects from one world to the other. And so we had cooperated on a lot of things, and we had like very tight meetings and cooperations. And at the same time, Worlds was taking out patents on the whole thing, which they got, and then which didn't mean anything because Black Sun went under and Worlds went under. But Black Sun had become successful. I think Worlds would really have become a very nasty entity. And I haven't really talked to Mitra about this. He was here like 2 months ago, but it didn't occur to me to ask him. But he published this patent. He was on the patent as well. And it was a couple of patents that they took out right at the same time. So basically, creating a patent for all the stuff that we did together. And that was kind of a weird thing. And I said, wow, this is an interesting move. But really have to ask him at some point. Maybe this is not something that you should ask. I have to ask.
Maybe it's not, but I think it provides me a certain amount of context too, right, to approach. Yeah. And it's all well and good as long as you're scrappy upstarts. But as soon as there's real money coming in, and this might actually, the patent that he does have, if it was something that you all created together, I actually do think, as the metaverse starts becoming more realized in a Zuckerbergian fashion, those might actually be something to talk about for you.
Yeah, I don't know whether aren't patents in the States limited to like 10 years or 15 years or anything? Isn't that something? Because if they were still active, they are owned by Worlds, I guess, not by Mitra. Yeah. So, and I don't know whether Worlds in any form, it's like, it existed for a long time. I know that like some of the old people still worked for it, was still in existence. Black Sun in one form or the other also still exists. Like when we shut down the company, we handed Cybertown over to the guys in LA, and they ran it for like 10 more years. But we also, Holger Gran, the guy who had brought the 3D browser to us, we handed it back to him. And he, with two other guys from Black Sun, started a company called Management. And that still exists, that company. And they basically also ported the browser to the glasses. So that's how Tamiko can even now show her Wormel worlds with Oculus and the Vives. She can show her Wormel world, her 3 pieces that she did there. She can show them in those classes because Bit Management has ported the browser onto those Android devices. Basically, yeah. I mean, those glasses are nothing but an Android device. Mm-hmm. And Android in its core runs OpenGL. So if you have an OpenGL-based Windows browser written in C++, you can basically compile it on Android and run it on Android. So that is also, the whole technology from back then, and that is really weird, still exists. And you can still run it.
Well, Peter, I know that I've taken up more of your time than we maybe had allotted, but this has been so fun and such a treat, and I'm really excited about the next iteration of this, where we can travel and we have travel funds and we can fly out there and bring a production crew.
No. We do this in the metaverse.
We do it in the metaverse only. Yeah. Perfect.
That's something that I still have all the code. I still have all the Black Sun code. Yeah. And every now and then I go in and compile parts and bits of it, and most of it compiles because it's written in C++, and those languages also have not really changed a lot since the mid-90s. So, and sometimes people from Cybertown, the old people as members of Cybertown, they have a Facebook group. And they reach out and say, couldn't we like restart it again? Couldn't we like compile it again? Couldn't we run it again? And actually I could, but it would be no. So if I hadn't started all this AR stuff with Tamiko, then maybe I would have sat down and said, okay, let's see what I can do with the Black Sun stuff. But now it's okay. It's other people can do that. So.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm working partly with Tamiko, but other projects with museum collections, trying to figure out what is the technical solve for this problem. Is it keeping the code base updated? Is it reauthoring? What does this look like? So that's something that with Tamiko, we're going to kind of be playing with some of the reauthoring components. But my hope this project with real funding is that we can create a digital stewardship center at San Jose State and work with developers on both kind of keeping code bases alive, but also
I have the Blacksign code base, but of course I don't have the rights to the Blacksign code base. I don't actually know, I know that at some point the guy who was, as we went into chapter 11 in 2002, and then basically we shut down the company, as we actually shut it down, and we shut it down with almost like a zero loss. It was really after .com crash in 2001, it was clear that there was no market, as there was no stock exchange anymore to go to. And so that really ended it. And at the same time, we knew that we were cash flow negative, so to speak, and we knew that money would run out in 6 months. And so that's what we actually did then. After 6 months, we shut it down. So in February of 2002, we shut it down. And I think there was actually very little ads there. So that was all more or less above water. But I know at the very last, some investor came and bought everything for like $100,000. So I don't know whether this investor still exists or remembers that he bought it or whatever. So I have the code, but I don't have the rights to put it away. So, and that's also, I was thinking about just putting it up on GitHub, but even there, I'm kind of shy doing that if it's not my code. So I could basically rip out the copyright notices and put it up there and say it's up there.
Well, I mean, maybe it's worth, me trying to do some homework and see if this investor is interested in, opening it up for academic use or. Yeah.
I really doubt that we can really dig up. So I could probably dig up the name of the investor, but I don't know whether this guy still exists, or who that is, or where that is. Yeah, so that was. So, yeah.
Also, an interesting part of the history, though. I mean, I think all of the.
Bruce Kale is dealing with this a lot in Internet Archive. What he does, he has this quest for publishing or republishing orphaned books, because with books you very often have to think that the publisher published the book in 1960, and then the publishing house got resold 17 times, and nobody knows who now owns these rights to this book, and therefore you cannot republish it, and therefore those books kind of, even if the people would be interested, books disappear because they cannot be republished, and the old one, of course, also disappear after a while. And Bruce really has this quest saying, no, I'm going to publish this stuff. And if they fight me for it, it's fine. Yeah, but I will not let those books die. So this is really an interesting question. Should we let the software die, or should we upload it to GitHub just to make sure that it's there forever?
Yeah, I mean, I think having worked a little bit with archivists, the idea is not that you're preserving it because you know how it's going to be used in the future, but you're preserving it because it's an important feature and you don't know how it will be used in the future. And I think that unknown, I think, is really interesting, especially when it comes to kind of deployables. I think that's, such an interesting way to think about this in software, right? The things that get archived are the most used, or the kind of the code bits that come to the top of Stack Exchange or something. But what does if GitHub starts thinking about itself as not just a repository but truly as an archive, what features might start becoming
for me,
more accessible?
But do you have the right to put something on GitHub that you don't own? So that's really all the stuff that I write myself that I can put up on GitHub. And there I've written much of it, but I've written it under the name of as an employee or as an employee of Blacksign, so I don't own the rights. But should I put it up on the web or on GitHub or wherever, just to make sure that it doesn't disappear and people can look at it? I don't know. So somebody can history major about
these new emerging fields of digital anthropology and all. If we don't do these things, right? The code might not be used again as an executable or deployable, but it might exist as a framework for understanding the history. And so there's so many questions. I think it's a fascinating topic. I don't know that everybody will, but I hope that we through these interviews at least start conversation, right? And I think it's not just us that having these questions. There's lots of institutions and other developers they're starting to think about both their legacy, but also, practical questions around archiving.
I mean, then the GitHub with its Arctic Vault thing is clearly going for the long term, although I doubt that the Arctic Vault is long term as they think, because Svalbard is basically thawing. So the Arctic Vault, actually I read an article that the Arctic Vault is tilting because it was built into some rocks in Svalbard, and now those rocks, or the foundation of those rocks, is melting, and so the whole thing, so they thought this would be forever, and now 10 years later the thing is tilting, or it starts to tilt.
Maybe one of these folks takes it to Mars with them. Archive for who, right?
Anyway. Do you know Brewster Kahle at all? Have you talked to him?
Not socially, but yeah, our paths have crossed, and I love what they're doing. One of my collaborators on this project, from Leonardo, so there's an archivist for Leonardo that's working with the Internet Archive on a couple of their projects as well. So we're aware of one another. And I would love, if I have funding or if he's interested, to bring him in a little bit more deeply into the conversation.
Just think, if ever Tamiko is in the Bay Area, bring it up, because she can really take you to Bruce and Mary, as his wife. They do a Thursday night dinner where they invite interesting people every Thursday. And so you could really go with Tamiko or me. We should come to one of those dinners.
That would be lovely. I would love that. So I will see if I can squeeze my way.
And they are really very social people. And Brewster is a very old friend of Tamiko's. So they really worked together when they were both, as Tamiko was like 28 and Brewster was 22, and they worked together at Thinking Machines. And then Brewster worked on this Waze project, and when Thinking Machines canceled the project, he turned it into a company. And it was the first search engine even before the web. And then there was a protocol, basically access Waze search engines with their own protocol before HTTP. C3950 was the name of the protocol. And then when the web,
can you say that again?
C3950. And then when the web happened, they realized, oops, now people can basically use web browsers and HTML or HTTP to access those things. And so Brewster, I worked for half a year for him, and like one of the projects I did, we brought advertising, not the stories, but the ads, where you said like 2-bedroom in Lower Manhattan or something like that. So we brought that on. Although in the end they didn't bring it, but they wanted to. So we had to. There was a full text search engine. Basically, like there's all this code that New York Times uses. So 2BR, and as a 2BR is the one thing I remember, like 2-bedroom, 3-bed. But they had other, like, because you paid for the letter in the ad.
So
and so there was like 2BR and then codes for different parts of the city. So in 12 letters, you could basically say I have an apartment with 3-bedroom, and it's in south of, it's in Soho, and it's on the 3rd floor, and you could also bring this in 12 letters. And so I wrote a search engine that basically parsed those queries.
Turn it back into like text.
Real text, yes. And then Brewster sold Waze to AOL and started a company called Alexa, and sold that to he sold then Alexa to Amazon, and that's where he has his money from. But then after selling Alexa to Amazon, he started the Internet Archive.
Well, it's interesting that kind of turned towards philanthropy or kind of philanthropic.
Brewster is a very interesting character. I think at the age of 6, he fell in love with the Library of Alexandria. Didn't fall in love with Alexandria. With Alexandra, he fell in love with the Library of Alexandria. And everything that he has done after that was really all about the Library of Alexandria, basically getting this idea to have a physical, in the beginning, of course, a physical space where all the knowledge of the world is together in a library and accessible for other people. This is everything he did was basically going in that direction. And now having the archive is really, and the archive, of course,